Up next, we're going to have a very interesting conversation, and that is, we actually going to have a bit of a debate, to be honest with you. So two people are going to be joining us. That is obviously Mr. Philip Rosenthal. He's the director from the ChristianView network, and then we'll also be speaking to Myrtle Clarke, who's our second guest in this one. So they will be on simultaneously, and it will be a brief debate. She's the director at Fields of Green for All. That for me is going to be an interesting conversation, because guess what we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about the Western Cape High Court's landmark ruling declaring that it is an infringement to ban the use of Dagga by adults in private homes. In making the ruling on Friday, it has allowed for the possession, cultivation and use of Dagga at home for private use. It has also ruled that Parliament must change sections of the Drug Trafficking Act as well as the Medicines Control Act. It has 24 months to do so. So this is the position that we're standing in right now. So for all intents and purposes, we are in a position whereby, Dagga is decriminalized from my very basic understanding. And obviously to help us understand that is Myrtle Clarke. As I said, our very first guest on this particular issue. Myrtle Clarke is with the Fields of Green for All. She's the director there. Myrtle, good evening to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening. That's a pleasure.
Great one. So, Myrtle, I mean, is this something that's still, I do understand there's still legislative changes that need to be made, but I mean, tonight, if someone is found in possession of Dagga, obviously in their own home, in the privacy of their own home, are they still liable to criminal sanction?
Yes, ultimately they are. They would have to go through the process in the courts in getting a stay of prosecution, pending the outcome of the case in Cape Town, and both in Cape Town and in Pretoria. But they would still have to go through the courts, and the chances are that people would still be arrested. One would hope not. Mm-hmm. But I think that the news will take some time to filter down to the police. Mm-hmm. So I don't think people should be complacent at all.
Yeah. So I don't think that now you can just go ahead and light up that it's completely and utterly legal yet. It's still a process that you still need to go through then. And there's also the probability of this matter then being taken further through an appeal process, et cetera, et cetera.
That probability is very low. You know, the decision was unanimous across all three judges on the bench. And the one outstanding fact in the case, and if you read the judgment, is that the state's evidence was extremely weak. And it wasn't backed up by experts who had published articles in scientific journals or conducted peer-reviewed research. The court did the best that it could with what it had. You know, Jeremy Acton and Gareth Prince were representing themselves. So it was an incredibly brave move on the part of citizens. And the court was incredibly helpful to these two citizens. And we had this favorable judgment. But it could only go so far under the circumstances.
Now, before I introduce Philip into the conversation, Myrtle, I just have a quick question for you. I mean, this issue came up when we had the IFP Member of Parliament, basically very bravely standing up and saying that, look here, I am dying of cancer. I do use Dagga privately. It helps me cope with my symptoms, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously the whole idea that this was then introduced as a notion or as a concept, in terms of it being actually, used for medical, or that's at least what we expected, that it was going to be used for medical purposes. The MP that I'm talking about is Mario Ambrosini, who stood up very bravely in Parliament saying that, look here, guys, this is what I'm going through. Please, government, consider legalizing this particular, this particular, I don't know what one calls it, herb. Let's call it a herb or plant. And now we have a very different sort of judgment that comes out of this, or case that was presented, obviously, that then would, if it goes through and it holds up all the various tests, would mean that people can use it privately within the comfort of their own homes, whether it be for recreational purposes or for medical purposes.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. The judgment supersedes anything that the Medical Control Council has put forward in terms of proposals for a new bill. And of course, the cannabis community is completely jubilant about this, because myself and my partner, and our case for the trial of the plant is for responsible adult use, because we're not sick. So to actually still keep it in Schedule 6, even if they have dropped it a schedule, they first of all acknowledge the fact that it is medicine. So that's a victory for Dr. Ambrosini. But at the same time, what about preventative medicine? You know, what about, there's too many questions around it. It's very restrictive, it's expensive, and it's not for all South Africans. Whereas the judgment in Cape Town is for all South Africans, and it really is the brightest light at the end of this tunnel. You know, we've been doing this for 7 years, and this really is a victory and a great step along the road.
Okay, sure. Let's hear who's sitting on the other side of the fence. That is, of course, Mr. Philip Rosenthal. He's the director of the ChristianView network. I take it that you hold a different view, that this is not necessarily a good thing.
Yes, I think that it's a very, very foolish and destructive decision, and I challenge it on two grounds. The one is the merits of the case, the benefits that are argued for legalizing Dagga, but the other one is the actual legitimacy of this decision, because we would argue that this is an abuse of power by Judge Dennis Davis, which we hope will be overturned by a higher court or alternatively through constitutional amendment. But really, this is something which we believe that he really had absolutely no right to do, and is a reckless and destructive decision. There's many reasons why we can argue that. But normally, firstly, that this should have been dealt with by Parliament, which was considering the matter and was only considering the possibility of medical use of such things. But secondly, such decisions, if they were made by a court, would normally only be made by a higher court. And there's other cases that are pending, which I think had stronger opposition that was not considered by this court. So, and then one's also got the toxic effects and destructive effects of Dagga, which were dismissed by this court, hearing only really one side of the evidence and not hearing a strong argument, I think, as our previous speaker has said, by the other side. I think the court said that the state did a poor job, but a higher court would have heard evidence from both sides on the medical side, and there's considerable medical evidence that Dagga is harmful.
Okay, so there's just a couple of things that I just need to take up with you there. And I mean, obviously, Myrtle had the benefit here of speaking first and being able to, having a bite at the cherry first. But what she clearly highlighted was the fact that, yes, it was a poor case that was highlighted by a case that was presented by the state in this particular instance. Obviously, there was not sufficient opposition or sufficient evidence in opposition to Dagga being used privately. But the second part that I find interesting, though, Philip, is that, Myrtle also pointed out the fact that there was obviously a clear problem with the type of evidence and the expertise that was brought to the forefront. I mean, your organization, for example, or many other organizations that would have the expertise, presumably, to give the necessary opposition, why did they not enter as at least amicus curiae, number one? Well, number two, let me just finish my question. Number two, it is the High Court, it was the High Court that made this particular order. It wasn't a magistrate's court, and the High Court does have, albeit limited, constitutional powers.
Okay, well, to answer your first question, there's a major court case set down for the 31st of July, which is in Gauteng, which is meant to be dealing with this thing, and most of the preparation had been put towards that case, rather than this one, which was seen as a kind of a minor thing, but then this thing has surprised everybody by the result. And we believe that this is reckless in many respects. But I think that what we're also facing at the moment is a situation where we have certain judges that are abusing their powers. Another example was Judge Fabricius on the euthanasia issue in April 2015, which was overturned in December last year by
the judge
the FDA. And the thing is now that if judges are going to abuse their powers at the High Court level, it makes it rather difficult for every interest group to cover every single case which is going on. I mean, you can have, there are many Dagga cases that are in process, and we did not expect this kind of result coming out of this particular case. Normally, if they did have a verdict that was substantially changing the legal situation, there would not be this ruling, for example, now that they say that it is an offence. So it would await confirmation of decision first by the Supreme Court of Appeal and then by the Constitutional Court. But now we have a reckless decision to try and impose things through this court.
Okay.
And I think we need to rein in these judges.
Okay, sure. So before I go back to Myrtle, Philip, you keep on talking about the recklessness of this particular case or the finding of this case. I mean, what do you base your assertion on? Because you're saying it's reckless. Why is it so reckless?
Well, firstly, there's the issue that one has precedent going back for pretty well 100 years, which is being overturned here. One has no intention by the framers of the Constitution it's based, they argue, on the right to privacy. Now, I think the framers of the Constitution are still alive. If one was to interview some of those people, I don't think that any of them would have envisaged this interpretation of the right to privacy, which is written in plain English and anybody can read it, being imposed on the rest of South Africa. Then there are enormous social impacts which come out of this decision, and this very same court has overturned numerous environmental impact assessments which are on small projects, just somebody building a building on the side of the mountain, which has social impacts which are much smaller than this, because they say that not proper studies have been done, yet they, on just hearing one side of the evidence without a proper opposition, in this particular instance, decide to change something for the law of the whole of South Africa as it has been for now 100 years. I would regard that as extremely reckless and taking over the role of Parliament.
Okay, Myrtle, I'm bringing you back into this one because, again, and I'm sorry, I'm going to nail my colors to the mast. It's not the fault of the victor in a particular court case if the opposition or the people that are leading the case presented poor argument. You know, the court doesn't sit there and say, let's have a really good lawyer up against another really good lawyer. What the court does is it listens to the case, and if your lawyer is pretty much bad at what they're doing, then so be it. If you lose the case because of poor legal argument, that's really unfortunate, and that is why we have appeals and that type of thing. But at your end, I mean, people like myself, I mean, I sit back and I look at it, and I wouldn't necessarily think that any one of my two boys should just pick up Dagga even as adults in the privacy of their own home and smoke it, because you know that there is concerns that I have around the use of Dagga, whether it be, especially if it's for recreational purposes. How does society remain, inverted commas, safe, considering that, we always have this old age adage going around that if tobacco and alcohol had to be introduced today, that it would be found not to be, both of them wouldn't be legal substances. So how do we make sure that we keep society safe from the negative or the possible perceived impacts that it could have on society?
Well, that one has actually been answered in the judgment that was given by Judge Davis.
Sure.
It was answered by the Department of Criminology from the University of Cape Town. And they've done, they're very involved with the gangs and the townships around in the Cape area, and they've done extensive research on the connection between cannabis and crime. And that is worth noting. And it's also worth noting that one needs a regulatory framework to work within. One can't work with this extensive black market, because then it's us and them. The youth, if they want to get hold of cannabis right now, it's much easier to get hold of cannabis than it is to get hold of a beer or cigarettes.
Very true,
There's regulatory frameworks around that. So when the youth go to the cannabis trader, who are they dealing with here? We don't know. That person's not asking for an ID. So I think that the best way to keep your children safe is to make sure that there's a regulatory framework and an age restriction.
And perhaps also maybe I play my role in explaining to them that, yes, even though it's now, let's assume that it's, you can use it in the privacy of your house and that holds up and that there's no repercussions for being over the age of 18 and being found in possession of the stuff, that there are certain concerns around it. I mean, that I think the similar arguments would apply to alcohol and, say, cigarettes, whereby if I don't want Mikey or Joshi to smoke or to drink excessively or to smoke excessively, that I tell them, look, this is what you could potentially expose yourself to, and it's up to them really within that framework to make up their minds in future.
Yes, exactly. And the most important thing is to have an honest conversation with your children. You know, at the moment with the reefer madness that has persisted over the 100 years that cannabis has been prohibited, people have the wrong perception of it. And we are not telling our children the truth. But the kids know better than we do because they're out there operating within their peer groups and they hear the truth. And when their parents come with the reefer madness, they don't believe their parents. And that is a shame. The drug education programs that do the rounds in the school with all of their fear-mongering, instead of telling the children the truth about it, it's all just fear-governed.
So before you tell us the truth about it, Myrtle, I just want to quickly invite the listeners to call in. 011-883-0702, 31702 for your SMSs. Hashtag Talk at 9 for those of you that want to add to this conversation. You better get dialing now because we don't have much time left with Myrtle and with Philip. But Myrtle, what is the truth about Dagga? Because, I mean, I've heard it all. I mean, all the way through from it is not physically addictive, it's safer than cigarettes, all the way through to you can drink it as a tea. To people telling me that, no, it's the worst possible thing that you could do, because if you start off on Dagga, next thing you're doing tik, and you're doing cocaine, and you're doing crack, and you're going to sell your house, and you're going to become a prostitute. You know, I mean, it's really two extremes in terms of information, and I think it's very difficult for even young people to discern what the truth is.
Well, I think that the young people have the best access to information than we've ever had, much more than I'm 50 years old, and the young people have lots and lots of access to information. And I'll say this again, the young people know lots more about the truth about cannabis than the older people do. And it's time for the youth to lead the way. Or our entire legal team from the advocate, everybody is under the age of 40.
Wow, okay.
And I think that you underestimate what the youth know already. So don't worry about them. We will have a kind regulatory framework that looks after their interests and the interests of the vulnerable minority, the poorest of the poor, or people who are vulnerable through poverty, they're vulnerable to addiction. That regulatory framework is for that. And this will all be brought to the fore in evidence in our case, which is the case that Philip was talking about. That is myself and my partner who sued the government 7 years ago, and we will be in the Pretoria High Court on the 31st of July. And we're hoping that the country is going to follow the case. We have penciled in 19 court days. With Justice Ledwaba is busy managing the case. So, Philip, I just have to say to you that all the evidence will be led across all 4 platforms of use of cannabis. And if you want evidence, we're going to be giving you evidence.
Okay,
19 court days. So that's the answer to the truth about Dagga. Going to be before the court.
Sure. But I mean, in terms of where we are right now, what I'd like to know, Myrtle, just from your side is, I mean, why is this such a good thing? I mean, you're obviously celebrating this. This is not, you didn't come out and say that, it's a freedom of choice thing only, but you're saying this is actually an innately good thing for society. So why is it an innately good thing? That's really what I'm looking for here.
Because the harms of prohibition far outweigh the harms of the plant. This plant has been around for thousands and thousands of years. And we very rarely go about singing the praises of the cannabis plant, but medicinally, industrially, it's got thousands and thousands of uses. And plus, just for me personally, I find it a very, very safe relaxant. I find it induces creativity. It's about my cognitive liberty at the end of the day. And that is what Julian, my partner, and I will be testifying in court. Is that it's freedom for me to explore the inner recesses of my mind. It's got nothing to do with the government.
Okay.
And that's where, and I was arrested in my own home 7 years ago now. And I know about the harms of prohibition. We help people across the country that are arrested for Dagga.
So, Myrtle, we'll touch on that, what the harms of prohibition specifically are. I have Errol on the line from Westdean. Just want to quickly take his comment. And then Anne, Philip, I'll come back to you. And then hopefully, Myrtle, if we have time, I'd like to understand what is so harmful about the current prohibition. That's what I wanted to know. Errol, out of Westdean, good evening to you.
Good evening, man. Thanks for taking my call.
Happiness, man.
A very, very interesting program.
Thanks, man.
You know, I hear all the arguments about the harms of prohibition, and I take the point. But as a parent of an 18-year-old who is addicted to weed and who has been in rehabs and is currently in a halfway house, and the hell that he's put us through in the last year or two, we have grave concerns about whether this is the right, are we doing the right thing, and what is the message that we're sending out to our kids. The kid is very smart. He's got access to the internet, and he's been, reading up on these kind of things which have happened in other countries, and knows that it was about to happen in South Africa. And so this is exactly the kind of ammunition that they need to fuel their addiction, and it is addictive.
Can I just ask a quick question there? Can I just ask a quick question there? Sorry, but I mean, I'm listening to what you're saying there about the whole prohibition thing, and I'm thinking that prohibition failed probably in your instance, and I'm not at all advocating for your son using cannabis, but what my concern is that while this was an illegal drug and it was banned, he had access to it even under those circumstances, and at the age of 18, I will make a horrible assumption, but I'll assume that he started using the stuff before he was 18 and was using it as a minor.
He was using it as a minor. We discovered that he was actually using it for about 3 years.
Wow.
And
okay.
using it covertly and obviously to an extent where he's very smart and duplicitous, so we were not able to actually pick it up. But I don't know. As I say, as someone, when I put the radio on and I heard your conversation, that made the hair on my back stand up, because I'm just thinking about if, with the challenges that they have, and I know it is easier to get hold of weed than it is alcohol. But But by doing this, are we not then? Is that not the message that kids will take? With all our greatest intentions of controlling it and regulating it, and all the kids will see it. Great, I can do it. I can go ahead. This is a green light. Let's have a party. And for someone like my son, that's basically ruined his life. I had to pull him out of matric. So yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that, Errol. I'm just quickly looking at the lines at the moment and what people want to come through. And I'll take one more call, and then for the remaining two people that are holding, we'll get back to you then a little later in the conversation. But let me go to Temba and Honeydew. Temba, let's keep it short and sharp, man.
Hello. We are really tired of this prohibition and arrest. I, for myself, have been arrested like twice, So I think the ruling at the Cape Town High Court is a step in the right direction for us. I'm a Rasta, and it's not only for Rastas, this victory or whatever some people they view it. Because this tree is natural, and the government and whoever, the authorities who are trying to say, no, it will make you mad, it will make you addictive or what, it's not making sense to me and to everyone else.
100%. Thanks there, Temba, for your input. Philip, I'm bringing you back into this one. So you yourself also, you're one of those people that's not too excited by the sort of the decriminalization or sort of the decriminalization status that we have at the moment. What's your concerns? Your concerns in terms of the impact on society?
Firstly, there's an impact on individuals, which I think we've already heard from the listener about the harm on the family. But then, we know that there's a significant drop in IQ of people who are on this drug. We can see bad work performance. If you look at some work that's been done by people who are on this drug, it's usually shoddy and poor. But further than that, it doesn't only impact them in the privacy of their own home, and this is what the court failed to consider. It also impacts on unborn babies who are then also born with that impaired brain function. They'll probably never be able to do maths at university. There's victims of violence from people who are become more violent because of this. It has different effects on different people. And then there's the impact on road accidents, where people driving with impaired function.
Okay, can I, Myrtle, I think that's from your line. Can you just keep it quiet while Philip is on?
Yeah. So there's these impacts which any environmental impact assessment would have the court would have forced them to consider these issues. I also argue it's a matter for Parliament, when Parliament would allow for public hearings on this issue from civil society, as they normally do on all legislation. These people are attempting to bypass Parliament and go through court and take advantage of judges who are really abusing their powers, in my opinion, and should be removed from the...
But Philip, that's not really much of an argument, mate, because we had we had, for example, the death penalty taken away through our court system. We've also had many other cases, for example, corporal punishment in schools taken away through our court process. So I really don't fall for the whole, public participation was lacking and so forth. As I said, anyone was able to approach the court and say that, look, I want to be an amicus curiae. For people that don't understand what that means, I want to be a friend of the court. I want to be another applicant in this particular matter because this is something of national interest. And now that the horses have bolted, quite literally, I have a problem with us sort of going back and blaming the judiciary on a case that has been heard.
Okay, sorry, just to clarify, the issue of the death penalty was understood by CODESA as an issue that they were allowing the court to decide on. That was anticipated in future. This is in a completely different category. I don't think anybody in the Constitutional Assembly would have anticipated this kind of interpretation coming out of the Constitution on the right.
Again, that's not the endaba. The issue is if it's able to go to court and it's heard in court and, the decision is made, so be it. What I'm asking you specifically for, though, what I really need to hear from you in the limited time that we have, Philip, please give me an opportunity to ask you the question. What is the societal impact? Because you mentioned, for example, the impact that it could have on unborn babies. A lot of people would tell you that mums who smoke cigarettes, which are completely legal and that are accessible to people above the age of 18, pregnant, not pregnant, short, tall, whatever their situation is, also causes a lot of harm. So does alcohol with fetal alcohol syndrome and all of these other things. So I'm just saying, if you maybe can just stick to what your concerns are from a societal perspective, on why this is such a bad decision.
Okay, well, that's firstly there are impacts from other drugs, such as you mentioned, tobacco and alcohol, but there is no drug that is legal in this country which has this degree of harm attached to it in many, many diverse ways and which affect different people differently. That's medical fact. You asked about questions of facts, and I've got in front of me American Medical Association's meta-study of all the other studies that have been done on this issue. They find very, very little evidence of medical marijuana having any kind of benefit. If anything, a very, very narrow set of circumstances with fairly weak evidence, and then the same effects can be produced through using the isolated chemicals within marijuana and without the harmful effect that you're going to get by smoking the stuff. So there's really no medical argument for needing to smoke marijuana.
Thanks, mate. That was a coherent argument. That's exactly what I was looking for, yeah?
Yeah. So, look, I think that this is an issue which needs a considerable amount of public debate, and I argue through the legislature. I hope that the higher court will overturn this decision and refer this matter to the legislature where it's in process of debate. I also disagree with the current proposals that are before Parliament at the moment and hope that those will be also rejected because there are many, many harms which come out of this particular drug. There's approximately 400 chemicals in smoked marijuana, And if one's trying to get a benefit out of one of them, what medical people would usually do is to isolate that particular chemical, do tests on it, and then prescribe that particular chemical rather than giving people a toxic mix of 400 chemicals.
Okay, meneer. Just hold it there because I just want to quickly go to Anne in Midrand, Alan in Johannesburg, then Myrtle. I'll give you another bite at the cherry. Anne, good evening.
Yeah, good evening. I just want to say quickly, if it does help people, which I know it does, I would go for it as well. I sat next to a woman at the hospital the other day, and she said she has no more epileptic fits. People give it to cancer patients. I'm not a druggie. I mean, a drug addict will smoke anything. But I think if it's good for health, we must pass this bill. And if it helps me, I'll use it medically. I'm not talking about getting...
No, for sure. And I mean, I guess where we're standing right now in terms of the legislation that we do have is that whether you use it for private use or for medical use, provided you use it for, not legislation, but I mean with the court decision that we have, if you use it privately or if you know, in your own home, or alternatively use it for medical reasons, then you should be pretty much above the law. I mean, if this obviously still holds going forward. Thank you so much.
Can you get locked up if you grow it?
We'll ask Myrtle that, because I'm also a bit, hazy. As you said, as you heard at the beginning of the show saying that obviously you could still get arrested, but you'll have to ask for a stay of prosecution, presumably until we see some finalization around this issue.
Yeah, medically, I'm all for it.
100%. Thanks, Anne. That was Anne out of Midrand. Let's go to Alan in Johannesburg. Good evening. Alan?
Yeah, hi there. I have one question, and that basically is that, cigarettes were basically told not to smoke them because it causes cancer. The smoke from the Dagga, can that cause cancer or emphysema? Any studies been done?
Much worse than tobacco.
Okay, Philip, I'll give you an opportunity to answer. I said Myrtle up next, and then I'll come back to you. Thank you, Alan. Thanks for your question. Myrtle, I mean, it is a valid question as well, because I've read, I came across an article. I mean, I'm not saying it's a medical journal or anything of the sorts, but that said that the smoke inhaled from Dagga, because it's unfiltered, etc., could have an even worse impact in terms of its ability to give you cancer.
Well, no, that's not correct. While we would never really advocate smoking anything, there's lots of different ways of delivering cannabis as recreationally or as medicine. So, and that whole debate about cannabis causing cancer is totally superseded by all the evidence that is there to support cannabis actually being an effective treatment for cancer, one of the effective treatments for cancer. So the whole cannabis and cancer debate will be brought forward within our trial by one of the world's foremost cannabis and oncology experts, Dr. Donald Abrams from San Francisco. This is the man who gave the name to HIV/AIDS, and his CV is 37 pages long. So he's a very eminently qualified individual, and he'll be flying out to South Africa to give evidence in person. He is what's called an integrative oncologist. So he uses cannabis with other treatments to treat cancer. So no, cannabis does not give you cancer. Cannabis has enormous potential to be an effective treatment for cancer, an effective treatment for the side effects from chemotherapy. If the patient chooses to use chemotherapy, cannabis can be used to alleviate the symptoms of the side effects of the chemotherapy.
Because chemo makes you very, very sick.
Yes. And the good things about the cannabis plants and the effect that they have is that they treat nausea, sleep, and appetite and pain. So those are the four things that most people who are not well, whether they have cancer, multiple sclerosis, or any other really, really serious disease, is that if you can eat and you can sleep and you can keep yourself relatively pain-free, you've got so much more of a chance of getting better. So I think what Philip has given us and delivered to the listeners, a really succinct summary of the arguments against this plant. Because, there are only so many arguments against it. But the research is growing every single day. As the doors are opening around the world, one of the reasons why we don't have research in South Africa is because it's been illegal to do research. Where are the people? Where are the professors, and where are the learned academia going to get the plants if the plant's completely illegal? But it's opening up around the world, so there are new studies being published every single day in scientific journals. And as far as alcohol and tobacco and that whole comparison that came up, we will be bringing out Professor David Nutt from Imperial College in London, and he is the world-renowned scale of harms expert.
Okay.
So there is a table that him and a whole panel of experts put together that puts the scale of harms of the various drugs. And alcohol is at the top, and mushrooms are at the bottom. And cannabis is 16 items on the list, and cannabis is about number 7. So we are not saying that cannabis is completely harmless. But the arguments against it need to be evidence-based and based in science. And that is why we're having a trial, and that is why we are not doing this politically.
So what is the aim? What is the aim of your court case? Because, I'm also a bit confused because we already have precedent out of the Western Cape. You're going to yet another high court, which has a similar standing to what we had out of the Western Cape. Why are you going there?
Yes, well, let me first explain that there's 2 different approaches to the court. The Western Cape High Court case was approached by way of application. So everything was done on paper, and then there was a hearing in December on the merits of the case as on paper. We in Pretoria are going by way of trial.
Okay.
So that is why it is going to take so long, 19 court days.
Yeah.
And we have the chance to bring our experts, and then the defendants, which are the government, they're defending their law, will bring their experts.
So trial arises out of a particular action. Someone's taking action against someone else. Are you suing the state? Have criminal charges been pressed? What are you suing the state?
We've sued the state on charges of enacting unlawful laws.
Okay.
And that was in 2011. So it's been going on ever since then. It's 7 government departments plus Doctors for Life, who are the 8th defendant who invited themselves to join the trial. I'm sure that Philip knows about Doctors for Life.
Okay, great one. Let's go back to Philip. Philip, you're listening to all of this. You heard that there's scientific evidence around this, disputing much of what you've been highlighting tonight as a concern.
Can I just read you from the American Medical Association's review of 79 different studies on cancer, what the benefits of it on that subject? Okay, they say the conclusion is that there was low-quality evidence suggesting that cannabinoids, that's not cannabis, smoking, that is individual elements of cannabis extracted and given to the patient, were associated with improvements in nausea and vomiting due to chemotherapy. Okay. Now, that is not saying it's curing cancer. It's just saying that it's reducing nausea and vomiting due to chemotherapy. There are other drugs which also do the same thing. Look, there's also side effects of this that need to be considered. That is not supporting evidence for supporting the legalization of smoking the weed. And
I don't know whose phone that is.
Evidence that they say that's not my study. That is the American Medical Association's review of 79 studies.
No, fair enough. And look, I think that we're getting a bit fixated on this whole idea of what the medical benefits of the use of cannabis is and is not. That's not really the aim of this conversation, right? We're looking at what is the current status quo and what is going to be the impact on society. So, Philip, just as a closing, by way as a parting shot on your side, where to next for you guys? Are you going to take this to the Constitutional Court? Are you going to be those concerned people saying that, look, you guys, we're not happy with this decision out of the High Court. We don't think that the High Court had the legitimacy, which you'll obviously have to argue in court. Number one. Number two, even if they do have the legitimacy to make this decision, this is why the decision was wrong. Are you guys going to do that?
I think we will be talking to other organizations, and we certainly will work together with them towards that end. and ensure that the arguments are presented, perhaps also supporting the state in what they're doing. But I'm hoping that this will be remedied by, I think what would be best was for these two cases to be joined and dealt with at the Constitutional Court level.
Fair enough. Are you actually looking at doing that, or is it something that you're still considering?
Well, our organization specifically probably will not join as an amicus or a party, but we certainly will be working on the issue with other organizations and doing research and argument towards trying to influence in that direction, as we've assisted with other cases in the past. And we hope that those arguments will be brought before the court and hopefully overturned, as the euthanasia issue was overturned in December last year, which I also believe was a very reckless and foolish decision. I think that people must not give up at this stage. This problem can be remedied.
Okay, up until this stage, Philip, of course, and I'm not talking about the current dispensation, but I'm saying that we've always had Dagga being illegal, but we know that Dagga has been a very, very common drug, a very commonly used drug, and that people have been imbibing it and in some instances presumably not using it in the way that Myrtle, for example, or her organization would advocate it to be used. I mean, people have mixed mandrax in it, and they've done all kinds of very interesting stuff with the stuff, right? Very exciting stuff that's still worrisome. But nonetheless, despite its illegal nature, despite the prohibition on Dagga, we've seen that it's still been very widely used. I mean, do you really think that this would make an iota of difference in terms of what is happening within our various societies? Because I think that has not come through in terms of your contribution this evening.
Yes, I think it definitely would make a difference. Whether something is legal or not can maybe make a 10 times difference in terms of how many people actually use something. We've seen that, for example, with the legalization of abortion. People were having abortions before it was legalized, but the actual numbers of babies that are being killed afterwards have increased enormously. And likewise, I think that similar will happen with cannabis if it's legalized. I think also one must consider that if this court case that Fields of Green is bringing in Johannesburg or in Pretoria is successful, the impacts are going to be even more drastic because, as I see it, as I understand it, that case could go further than just legalizing home use. Maybe they can clarify that for me, which would have even bigger impacts. But I also think that this court is deluded in thinking that they can legalize it just for home use and then stop people from trading that and stop teenagers from accessing it.
Okay, Philip, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. That was Philip Rosenthal. He's the director of the ChristianView network, talking about a couple of things there, yeah. I thought that the termination of pregnancy argument would be highlighted, but I think that the difference is now the termination of pregnancy is actually legal. Women are safer. They do have terminations of pregnancy for various reasons, as opposed to in the past, where it was sort of a nurse in a dark closet doing as she thought was fit, or a person, not even a nurse, just a person performing these. Myrtle, I'm going to give you the parting shot. And what I'd like to know from your side is, just in brief, what is supposedly the benefit now of taking this away from that prohibition space? Because, I didn't quite hear an argument from your side saying that, look here, this is why prohibition is bad on society. I'd just like to understand that.
Okay, well, it will stop 1,000 arrests per day for cannabis in South Africa, and consequently all of the criminal records that go with that ruin young people's lives, much more than using this plant ruins young people's lives. So that is certainly the biggest benefit, because I've said before, the harms of prohibition far outweigh the harms of this plant. And, you know, we are going to court across 4 platforms for responsible adult use, for the use, trade, and cultivation of this plant so that it can benefit our economy. We're bringing an economist, we're bringing people who know about cannabis economies around the world to court to show the court how this can benefit the economy. And one just has to look at places like Colorado and other states in the United States and Uruguay and places like that where it's really benefiting the economy. So we have a elaborate plan for regulation of this plant, and we're really looking forward to it. It's less than 120 days to the trial now. We've got a lot of work to do, and we're going to stand up for all citizens who choose to use this plant. If you don't choose to use this plant, then don't. We don't mind. We're not advocating.
Isn't that the issue at the center of it? That's what I find so fascinating, because the issue is it's about choice, right? And I presume that as an adult, if you choose to use this plant in whatever form, smoke, tea, bathe in it, eat it, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you know that there's 1,010,000 uses for it. Then you should do it so responsibly. You know, it shouldn't be a case of, 3-year-old, roll a joint for yourself and have fun. You know, this should be done within what would be regarded as being at least remotely safe and remotely responsible. But there's this one last question that I have for you on this issue, and it's actually introduced via SMS. My son's life and brain has been destroyed by Dagga. This is someone that came through anonymously. Now, between you and I won't say what his name is. He's not in the country anymore, but we had a friend that a very close friend at university in Res, that smoked copious amounts of cannabis. He smoked it like cigarettes, quite frankly, just before an exam, etc., etc. And I don't know if it was just me or, if it was actually the truth, but we saw a gradual deterioration, in motivation levels. He was a little more creative, but the guy was studying computer science, I think, at the time, and statistics. So we saw grades slipping, etc., etc. I mean, what about people saying that, look, that's the negative impact that this plant unfortunately has on people that use it?
That is what responsible adult use is all about. The fact that all responsible adults are aware that there's a vulnerable minority. There's in anything in society, there's a vulnerable minority. If you are going to get into a 16-seater taxi, you are more vulnerable than somebody who is getting into a Class C Mercedes. So I think that it's just life that you will always have. We've seen people in our very own home have what we call an allergic reaction to cannabis and have a psychotic episode. I'm not denying that this doesn't happen, and I'm not denying that there is a vulnerable minority, and there is something called laziness. There is something called, I'm trying to escape from my problems, therefore I will numb myself out of real life. These are all very real parts of being human in the 21st century. And you can't cover the whole thing in a sugary coating and say, okay, we're going to make the whole world nice. The world, particularly, hospitable a lot of the time. I mean, look what's going on in South Africa politically at the moment. There's turmoil. Life, it's all about education and giving your kids the best start that they can give. And I totally understand the concerns of a parent. And that is why we need responsible adult use under regulation. And not a free-for-all. And we need the vulnerable minority, who are the poor people in this country, who are growing and selling this plant as their only cash income. We need those people to be legitimized and not be sprayed with poison by police helicopters over all their homesteads. That's what we need to stop. Those are the people who make a living out of this plant and have done for the last 700 years. So it's not, there will always be those people who it has a negative effect on, but they certainly are in the minority.
And I guess the big word here is responsible use. Myrtle, listen, I thank you so much. It was great chatting to you. I'm just going to declare that despite the dreadlocks, I don't have a personal stake in this particular case. But good luck to you and all the best. I mean, it was a really interesting chat, and I definitely learned a lot tonight.
Good. That was a pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity.
No sweat. Of course, that was Myrtle Clarke. She is the director at Fields of Green for All, an NGO that obviously looks at the issue of legalizing Dagga. They're going to be in court pretty soon here in Pretoria in the North Gauteng High Court, having further discussions around this issue in court having all kinds of interesting people giving testimony on it. And it's definitely one to look out for. Look, I mean, it's one of those interesting and contentious issues. And like I said, I don't have a personal stake. I'm not one of those people that's vehemently opposed to it. I'm also not one of those people that's vehemently in support of it. To be quite frank, as she said, presumably if people can be responsible about it, then I guess I'd say why not? But simultaneously, there is an understanding that there's a concern for people, especially me coming from a community and from an environment where Dagga and the use of Dagga was pretty regular and quite openly done. And I saw what the impact was on those individuals that obviously participated in it. And it's not just at university. I mean, people do it within our communities, and unfortunately, a lot of the time, they don't just stick to sort of rolling it into a joint or putting it in a bong. They do all kinds of other interesting stuff with it as well, which can have serious consequences. But let me get to those SMSs. Looking at it, our children are at stake. More children exposed to Dagga. How sick this nation is. How can they not protect children? It disgusts me more. Worried about 1,000 arrests a day. The woman has damage to her brain. And this is from Anon. Well, Anon, our kids are exposed to boozing parents every single day that beat them half to death sometimes. So that, for me, makes our nation sick as it stands already. Maybe you want to come in on that one. I'm 57 years old, have smoked dope since 17, so that means that you've been smoking dope for 40 years. I have a highly skilled profession. I also play the drums as a hobby. It relaxes me, and become very creative. Viva legislation. This is from Larry. Larry, thanks for that one. It's just the smoke from the stuff smells really foul. This is from Brent. Well, Brent, I think that's the last thing that is of concern here, the foul smell. I think a bigger concern is at stake here. Anyway, guys, taking more of your SMSs on 31702, hashtag talk at 9, and I'm sure we can squeeze in one last phone call, 011 883 0702. And as I said, SMSs on 31702, hashtag talk at 9, both on Twitter as well as on Facebook.